The relationship between Israel and Iran is fraught with tension. The Islamic Revolution of 1979 drastically altered the geopolitical landscape. Ayatollah Khomeini opposed Israel's existence, viewing it as an illegitimate entity. Overnight, Israel transformed from a partner to a sworn enemy. The Israel-Iran conflict is further complicated by nuclear proliferation. Iran's pursuit of nuclear technology has been a source of immense concern for Israel. Israel views a nuclear-armed Iran as an existential threat. The animosity between Israel and Iran extends far beyond direct interactions. Both nations have engaged in a shadow war, utilizing proxies and covert operations. This has contributed to instability throughout the Middle East. In the years preceding the strikes, a tense calm settled over the Middle East. The Arab Spring uprisings reshaped the political landscape of the region. The JCPOA offered a glimmer of hope for a thaw in relations. Despite the semblance of calm, a shadow war raged on between Israel and Iran. Israel carried out daring operations deep inside Iran. Iran utilized its network of proxies to harass Israel. Cyber warfare became another front in this shadowy conflict. At the heart of the escalating tensions lay Iran's nuclear program. The 2015 nuclear deal had offered a temporary reprieve. Israel viewed Iran's actions with alarm, fueling a more aggressive posture. Pinpointing the exact trigger for the Israeli strikes on Iran remains debated. Some reports suggest an attempt by Iranian-backed forces to target Israeli interests. Others maintain the strikes were a preemptive measure to degrade Iran's military capabilities. In the immediate aftermath of the strikes, the world held its breath. Information remained scarce, with both sides controlling the narrative. The fog of war obscured the true extent of the conflict. The Israeli strikes aimed to cripple key elements of Iran's military infrastructure. The targets reflected a deep understanding of Iran's military capabilities. The element of surprise played a crucial role in the initial success. The element of surprise proved crucial to the initial success of the Israeli operation. Stealth technology allowed Israeli warplanes to penetrate enemy airspace undetected. The speed and ferocity of the attack aimed to create chaos and paralysis. Cyber warfare has become an integral part of military strategy. Israel deployed sophisticated cyber weapons to cripple Iran's command and control. Electronic countermeasures played a significant role in the Israeli operation. Amidst the fog of war, with information tightly controlled by both sides and the truth often the first casualty, assessing the full human cost of the conflict proved challenging. While both Israel and Iran claimed to have avoided civilian casualties, reports emerged of innocent lives lost in the crossfire, a grim reminder of the devastating consequences of military action. International organizations, hampered by limited access to the conflict zone and reliant on often unreliable eyewitness accounts, struggled to verify the conflicting claims and counterclaims. The fog of war, exacerbated by the deliberate spread of misinformation and propaganda, made it difficult to separate fact from fiction, adding to the anguish of families desperate for news of loved ones caught in the conflict. The use of precision-guided munitions, while designed to minimize collateral damage, does not eliminate the risk of unintended consequences. In the chaos of battle, with tensions running high and the fog of war obscuring the true picture on the ground, even the most sophisticated weapon systems can malfunction. And even the most carefully planned operations can go awry. The human cost of the conflict extended far beyond the immediate casualties. The psychological trauma inflicted on those who witnessed the violence firsthand, the displacement of families forced to flee their homes, and the long-term economic impact of the conflict all added to the suffering endured by innocent civilians caught in the crossfire. As the dust settled, both sides began assessing the damage. The true extent of the destruction remained difficult to gauge. Israel struck a significant blow to Iran's military capabilities. Iran eventually acknowledged the destruction inflicted on its military infrastructure. Key air defense installations lay in ruins. Command and control centers had been knocked offline. The damage to Iran's nuclear program remained difficult to assess. Some reports suggested key facilities had been damaged or destroyed. Iran might use the strikes as a rallying cry. Israel emerged relatively unscathed. The element of surprise allowed Israel to achieve its objectives with minimal losses. The long-term strategic implications remained far from certain. News of the Israeli strikes on Iran reverberated across the globe, sending shockwaves through diplomatic channels and sparking a flurry of international condemnation. World leaders, caught off guard by the sudden eruption of violence, issued urgent calls for restraint, fearing a dangerous escalation that could ignite a wider regional conflagration. The United Nations Security Council, the primary body responsible for maintaining international peace and security, convened an emergency meeting to address the crisis. Member states, deeply divided on the Israeli action, struggled to find common ground. Condemnations of the strikes, particularly from Arab and Muslim majority nations, were met with staunch defenses from Israel and its allies, citing the right to self-defense and the need to counter Iranian aggression. The United States, a steadfast ally of Israel, found itself in a delicate position. While expressing unwavering support for Israel's right to defend itself, the Biden administration also emphasized the need for de-escalation and a diplomatic solution to the crisis. The specter of another protracted conflict in the Middle East, a region already grappling with multiple crises, loomed large over Washington's calculations. European powers, while condemning the violence and urging restraint, also expressed concerns about Iran's nuclear program and its destabilizing activities in the region. The memory of the Trump administration's unilateral withdrawal from the Iran nuclear deal in 2018, a move widely criticized by European allies, added another layer of complexity to the diplomatic efforts to defuse the crisis. The Israeli strikes on Iran once again exposed the deep divisions within the international community on how to address the complex challenges posed by Iran's nuclear ambitions and regional activities. The familiar fault lines, often drawn along geopolitical and ideological lines, resurfaced, hindering efforts to forge a united front and find a peaceful resolution to the crisis. One camp, led by Israel and its allies, argued that Iran's nuclear program, coupled with its support for militant groups and its destabilizing influence in the region, posed an existential threat that demanded a firm and decisive response. They maintained that the strikes, while regrettable, were necessary to degrade Iran's capabilities and deter further aggression. The opposing camp, which included many Arab and Muslim majority nations, condemned the strikes as a dangerous act of aggression that violated international law and risked triggering a wider conflict. They argued that the only path to lasting peace lay in diplomacy, dialogue, and a return to the negotiating table. Caught in the middle were those who recognized the legitimacy of both sides' concerns but struggled to find a workable solution. They acknowledged the threat posed by Iran's nuclear program, but worried that military action would only exacerbate tensions and make a diplomatic resolution even more elusive. The Israeli strikes on Iran reverberated throughout the Middle East, further deepening the fault lines that have long divided the region. Regional alliances, forged in the crucible of shared interests and historical grievances, solidified as nations chose sides and braced for the potential fallout of the escalating conflict. Israel, long wary of Iran's growing influence in the region, found itself with a strange mix of allies and adversaries. While traditional Arab rivals, such as Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, quietly welcomed the strikes as a blow against a common enemy, they remained publicly reticent, wary of being drawn into a wider conflict. Iran, for its part, could count on the unwavering support of its allies and proxies, including Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in the Gaza Strip. These groups, armed and funded by Iran, condemned the strikes and vowed to retaliate at a time and place of their choosing, adding to the sense of unease and uncertainty that gripped the region. The Syrian civil war, already a complex and bloody conflict, threatened to become even more entangled with the Israeli-Iranian rivalry. Iran's presence in Syria, ostensibly to support the Assad regime, had long been a source of concern for Israel, which had conducted numerous airstrikes against Iranian targets inside Syria in recent years. The sudden eruption of violence in the Middle East sent shockwaves through global energy markets as traders and investors grappled with the potential fallout of the escalating conflict. The region, home to some of the world's largest oil and gas reserves, plays a pivotal role in global energy supplies, and any disruption to production or transportation routes can have far-reaching economic consequences. Oil prices, already volatile in recent months due to a combination of factors, including the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic and geopolitical tensions, surged in the immediate aftermath of the Israeli strikes. The fear that the conflict could escalate and disrupt oil shipments from the Persian Gulf, a vital choke point for global energy flows, sent traders scrambling for safe haven assets, driving up prices. The Strait of Hormuz, a narrow waterway separating Iran and Oman, through which a significant portion of the world's oil supply passes, became a focal point of concern. Iran, in previous confrontations with the West, had threatened to close the strait, a move that could cripple global trade and send energy prices soaring. The uncertainty surrounding the conflict, coupled with the potential for further escalation, created a climate of fear and volatility in global markets. Businesses and consumers alike braced for the possibility of higher energy prices, which could fuel inflation, stifle economic growth, and add to the already significant challenges facing the global economy. As the dust settled on the initial wave of strikes, the international community faced the daunting task of navigating a path to de-escalation and preventing a wider conflict. The diplomatic tightrope, fraught with obstacles and landmines, required a delicate balancing act, seeking to address the legitimate security concerns of all parties while avoiding any actions that could reignite the flames of war. The United States, despite its unwavering support for Israel, found itself thrust into the role of mediator, leveraging its diplomatic clout and its relationships with both sides to try to tamp down tensions. The Biden administration, while condemning Iran's nuclear program and regional activities, also recognized the need to avoid a military confrontation that could have catastrophic consequences. European powers, eager to salvage the remnants of the Iran nuclear deal and prevent a nuclear arms race in the Middle East, also stepped up their diplomatic efforts. They urged both sides to exercise restraint, return to the negotiating table, and seek a peaceful resolution to the crisis through dialogue and diplomacy. The path to de-escalation, however, remained fraught with obstacles. Mistrust ran deep, fueled by decades of animosity and a history of broken promises. Both sides, having staked out their positions and committed themselves to a course of action, faced pressure from within their own ranks to stand firm and avoid any appearance of weakness. The aftermath of the Israeli strikes on Iran left the world holding its breath, shrouded in a fog of war with scarce information and looming escalation. The international community watched with apprehension, bracing for a conflict that threatened to spiral out of control. The complex web of actors involved added to the uncertainty, each with their own agendas and calculations. Iran, reeling from the strikes, faced internal pressure to retaliate, yet understood the risks of a wider conflagration. Israel had to weigh further military action against the risk of a regional war. The United States faced a diplomatic tightrope walk, seeking to deter Iranian aggression while restraining its Israeli ally. The fog of war, thick with misinformation, made it challenging to respond effectively. Section 2. The Proxy War Enigma. Deciphering the next moves on a regional chessboard. Israeli strikes on Iran added a volatile element to the Middle East proxy conflicts. Iran's network of militias could strike back indirectly, targeting Israel and its allies. Hezbollah, based in Lebanon, emerged as a potential flashpoint with its vast arsenal. They could inflict significant damage on Israel but risk devastating Lebanon. Hamas in Gaza could launch smaller-scale attacks but face overwhelming Israeli retaliation. Iran could also activate proxies in Syria, Iraq and Yemen, targeting Israeli interests. These attacks could further destabilize the already volatile region. Section 3. The Nuclear Shadow Looms. A dangerous game of brinkmanship and deterrence. Iran's nuclear program has long been a source of anxiety for Israel and the international community. Israeli strikes aimed at degrading Iran's military capabilities also carried the implicit threat of further action. Iran maintains its nuclear program is for peaceful, civilian energy purposes. However, Iran's history of secrecy has fueled suspicions of nuclear weapon ambitions. From Iran's perspective, acquiring a nuclear deterrent is seen as necessary to prevent Israeli attacks. This dangerous game of brinkmanship risks miscalculation and unintended escalation. A single misstep could shatter peace and plunge the region into catastrophic conflict. Section 4, A World on Edge, managing the global fallout of a regional maelstrom. The Israeli strikes on Iran sent ripples of unease and uncertainty across the globe. The world, already grappling with COVID-19 and climate change, now faced a new conflict in a vital region. The global economy, still fragile from the pandemic, braced for potential fallout. Higher oil prices threatened to fuel inflation and stifle economic growth. Diplomatic tensions grew as the conflict exposed deep divisions within the international community. The Israeli strikes on Iran highlighted the interconnectedness of global challenges and the fragility of peace. The Israeli strikes on Iran, a dramatic escalation in a long-simmering conflict, served as a stark reminder of the deep-seated animosity and mistrust that has plagued relations for decades. The echoes of history, replete with broken promises and cycles of violence, reverberated through the region, casting a long shadow over any prospects for peace. The roots of this enduring conflict run deep, intertwined with complex historical narratives and geopolitical rivalries. From the ashes of the 1979 Iranian Revolution, a legacy of suspicion and hostility took root, poisoning relations for generations. Efforts to bridge this chasm have faltered repeatedly, dashed against the rocks of mistrust and historical baggage. The Israeli strikes on Iran also underscored the perilous nature of brinkmanship in an era defined by the existential threat of nuclear war. The shadow of a nuclear-armed Iran, a nightmare scenario long feared by Israel and its allies, loomed large over the conflict, adding an unnerving dimension to an already volatile situation. The strikes, widely seen as a calculated gamble by Israel to degrade Iran's nuclear capabilities, carried the implicit threat of further action, a message aimed not only at Tehran but also at the international community, that Israel considered Iran's nuclear ambitions an existential threat it was prepared to counter by any means necessary. Iran, for its part, responded with defiance, vowing to retaliate at a time and place of its choosing, while also using the strikes as justification for accelerating its nuclear program. The Iranian leadership, facing internal pressure to project strength, calculated that only a nuclear-armed Iran could truly deter future Israeli attacks and guarantee its security in a hostile region. This dangerous game of brinkmanship, where each side sought to deter the other through a combination of military strength and veiled threats, carried the risk of miscalculation and unintended escalation. A single misstep, a misinterpretation of intentions, or an unforeseen event could shatter the fragile peace and plunge the region into a conflict with potentially catastrophic consequences. The stakes, already high, were raised significantly by the spectre of nuclear war, a haunting reminder of the fragility of peace in the 21st century. The Israeli strikes on Iran, while demonstrating the limits of military force, also underscored the imperative of diplomacy as the only viable path to a lasting resolution. With military options seemingly exhausted and the spectre of a wider conflict looming, the international community faced the urgent need to revive diplomatic efforts and engage in a serious and sustained dialogue with all parties. However, the path to dialogue, always challenging in the context of the Israeli-Iranian conflict, was made even more difficult by the heightened tensions and mistrust engendered by the strikes. The Biden administration, while expressing a willingness to re-engage with Iran, faced skepticism from both Tehran and Jerusalem, each wary of the other's intentions and doubtful of the prospects for a breakthrough. Overcoming these obstacles would require a concerted effort by all parties, a willingness to set aside past grievances, and a commitment to finding common ground. The international community, led by the United States and its European allies, had a crucial role to play in facilitating this process, providing assurances, bridging divides, and incentivizing compromise. The alternative, a continued cycle of violence and retaliation, fueled by mistrust and the pursuit of short-term gains, was a recipe for disaster. The stakes were too high, the potential consequences too grave to allow this conflict to fester and escalate. Diplomacy, however difficult and fraught with obstacles, remained the only hope for a more peaceful future. The Israeli strikes on Iran, a watershed moment in the long and troubled history of the Middle East, presented both a challenge and an opportunity for the international community. The challenge lay in managing the immediate crisis, preventing further escalation, and containing the fallout of a conflict that threatened to destabilize an already volatile region. The opportunity, though less obvious, lay in the potential to forge a new security architecture for the Middle East, one that addressed the root causes of conflict, promoted regional cooperation, and created a more stable and prosperous future for all. Such an ambitious undertaking would require a fundamental shift in thinking, a move away from the zero-sum mentality that has long characterized relations between regional powers. It would necessitate a willingness to address long-standing grievances, to acknowledge the legitimate security concerns of all parties, and to find creative solutions that transcended the old paradigms of conflict and confrontation. The path ahead would be fraught with obstacles, a journey through a minefield of mistrust, historical baggage, and competing interests. Success would require patience, perseverance, and a shared commitment to a future where dialogue and diplomacy, not bombs and bullets, determined the fate of nations. The world watched and waited, hoping that the lessons learned from this latest crisis, however painful, might yet pave the way for a more peaceful and prosperous tomorrow. The stakes were too high, the potential consequences too grave to settle for anything less.